Senator Pocock, welcome to 7:30.
Evening, Sarah.
Now, there are some reports today that the government is considering the call for an urgent increase in JobSeeker. What have they told you?
I haven't heard from the government about this. I think the report yesterday took a lot of people by surprise, including the committee that had spent a lot of time working on it. So today I've been reading it through. Clearly, raising the rate of JobSeeker and youth allowance is urgent. The report was very clear that the payments are so inadequate that it's actually preventing people from getting back into the workforce, which is the whole point of the payment. So it is really urgent, and the government has an opportunity at this budget to start to address that.
So just to understand, just to be clear, you don't have any information on, because the reports have been somewhat conflicting today, whether they are open to it or not, which is the view that was formed late last night.
I've probably heard as much as you. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. This is urgent. You talk to people who are on JobSeeker and youth allowance who want to get back into the workforce, and instead they're having to decide whether to buy food or to pay for their prescription at the pharmacy. You've got young people who are struggling to afford to pay for public transport to get around town to uni or a job interview. It's so important that we make this investment and ensure that people are actually able to get back into the workforce. And that was one of the key things that they recommended from this report.
Now, do you think that the government is open to bringing in further increases over time, that is, in a staged way, even if they're not going to support an immediate boost, which is, as you say, what the report is asking for?
The report highlights the urgent need now, but also says they understand that the budget is tight and they at the minimum should be a staged approach. But clearly this is important. We talk about the budget and how tight things are. Yes, there is a structural deficit, there is debt, but this is about priorities. And when the budget is tight, we should be prioritising people. People's budgets across the country are tight. People are making tough decisions, and I would love to see the government prioritise people. And there's options on the table. There's $250 billion of stage 3 tax cuts, which, as we learn more and more about them, really don't make sense in the current economic climate.
Let me come back to them in a moment. I want to just go to the deal that you signed with the government in order to have this committee stood up. Now, when the government got your approval for their IR bill, which was very important for them, you said at the time that it was going to be a game changer for those living below the poverty line. Do you regret now that you didn't bargain harder?
I bargained hard. I pushed them on a number of things. They went a lot further than I was expecting, and in the end got to the point where on the IR side of things I was comfortable with the compromises there. But this was something, these are for people who are between jobs, who aren't employed, who weren't captured by that IR reform. And as someone who's new to Parliament, I've been pretty shocked by all the advice that goes into the budget. The government just claims cabinet in confidence. We don't actually know what advice is going into that. This is a clear, transparent way to have an expert panel that has experts in the field, peak organisations, businesses, unions, economists, looking down and saying, well, what should the rate of these be? And how do we incentivise people to get back and contribute? And every year we're going to have that before the budget.
Now that information is clearly valuable, but do you think it's possible that the government took advantage of your inexperience at that stage?
I don't think so. As I said, with the IR reforms, I pushed them hard. I was obviously
but
pushing
on this
them
side,
on.
I mean in terms of setting thresholds for what should come out of this report. It's got data that's very important, but it's also got very clear requests for what should happen and the urgency with which that should happen. Now, if this turns out to be just information, have you been sold a pup in a way?
Well, this is how our democracy works, and I think this strengthens it, because the government of the day, it's their budget. They do the budget. We now have, for the first time, independent advice that the government is commissioning and is made public before a budget. And if they don't act on expert advice that is setting out what should be done, what the potential consequences of not doing that are, then people get to vote at elections. They get to talk to their local representatives. You know, here in the ACT, we have 4 federal members who are Labor members, who are in government. And I'm hearing from people in the ACT that this is important to our communities. This is important for our future. This is an investment in a more inclusive society, an investment in actually tackling disadvantage.
Do you think it's possible, however, that the government could take a look at this report with its urgent requests and do nothing?
We see governments ignore advice all the time. And again, when I was outside of politics, I was frustrated by that. Being an independent, it's still a frustration. I guess my role is to listen to the community that I represent here in the ACT and find ways of ensuring that there is more transparency and that we can hold the government to account on these really important issues, that they don't just affect the people on these payments. They affect all of us. You know, rising inequality is something that we should all be concerned about here in Australia. And as one of the richest, the most wealthy countries in the world, we are one of the countries that can actually choose to do something about it.
I suppose, in a way, you have had the benefit now of seeing politics up close for a while. Is this a learning curve for you, really, as a power broker for the powerless?
Well, I'm really impressed by the work that the committee did. There was an interim committee that had a short-term time frame. This will now be legislated, and every year we'll be able to look at our social security safety net, which I think is something Australians should be really proud of. This is something that we should be constantly looking at and saying, how can we ensure that people between work, people who need the support, are actually able to live? You know, you sit down and talk to people who are on these payments, and some of the stories, you know, you've got people who, for them, buying light bulbs is something that they consider a luxury. So they are moving light bulbs around their house at night. That is not conducive to someone trying to get back into the job market, of applying for jobs, of potentially finishing off a little bit of study. We can do better.
So you raised the issue of the stage 3 tax cuts earlier, and you and Jacqui Lambie have talked about this a lot. Will you now be looking for opportunities? If you don't get the kind of result you want from this report, will you and Jacqui Lambie be looking for opportunities to leverage your voting power to stop those tax cuts?
Well, the major parties seem to have a unity ticket on this. In my mind, good economic management means that you are dealing with the facts in front of you and then you're having to adapt. And we see that with interest rates going up. And to stick to something that was legislated in 2018, before Putin invaded Ukraine, before energy prices went through the roof, inflation went up, cost of living has become such an issue, why would you just stick to something that is going to benefit mostly the wealthiest Australians? That it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't seem like the right direction for our country, when at the same time we're saying, well, we can't afford all these other things that are actually going to look after people.
That story you told before about the light bulbs is I think that's what everyone's going to take from this interview. But just briefly, do you understand the government that can choose not to make a priority of people in those circumstances?
Mm-hmm. I understand they're faced with some tough budget decisions, but as I said, there are options on the table. We've seen recently them commit to hundreds of billions of dollars for submarines, and in response they said, we cannot not make this investment. And I'd argue that this is an investment in Australians. As I said, we should be really proud of our social security safety net. It used to be 90% of the age pension, and that's slipped right down. We haven't stayed on top of it and ensured that people can actually live on those payments. And the committee has basically said, get it back up to 90% so that people, when they're on those payments, can work to get back onto the, contribute and be fully employed.
Thank you, David Pocock. We'll see what happens next on this, but thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me.